5 more Ontario school boards and 2 private schools filed lawsuits last week against social media giants Meta, Snapchat, and TikTok. They allege the addictive properties of the apps have compromised all students' abilities to learn, disrupted classrooms, and created a student population that suffers from increasing mental health harms. These latest school boards join 4 others who filed suits back in March, bringing the total amount being sought by them to more than $7 billion. Frances Haugen has been sounding the alarm about the lack of accountability at social media companies for several years now. In 2021, she left her job at Facebook and blew the whistle on the company's choices, warning that they were prioritizing profits over safety, especially when it came to young users. She has since testified before the U.S. Congress and at parliaments around the world. I spoke to Frances Haugen about how this legal move by Ontario schools will unfold and how governments need to respond. Frances Haugen, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
So this week in this country, there were another 5 school boards that joined a list of 4 that are suing the largest social media companies. I know that that is absolutely happening in the United States as well. And I wonder what you make of the approach of schools trying to elicit some sort of response from social media giants this way.
I think there's kind of 2 main focuses that we hope to have accomplished from lawsuits like this. So on a really basic level, most of the public is not aware of what extreme costs school boards are spending to compensate for the damages that are being caused by these platforms. When you have a student who has their phone open in class over the course of a school year, it leads to significant learning loss, and that's to be compensated with things like tutoring. You see things like violence in schools elicited by kids engaging in either pranks or things like fights that they then put up online. And you have to increase things like discipline. That's not even including costs for things like counseling for anxiety or depression. So one is our schools need the resources just to kind of keep up with the costs that are being inflicted on them. But the second is these platforms are the result of a system of incentives. When they're allowed to operate and make other people pay for their costs, they make choices that are optimized just for growth and safety. One of the things that we've seen from the lawsuits in the United States is that time and time again, this is evidence that's now publicly available. Anyone can go read it. Time and time again, Facebook ran experiments that benefited kids, but when they saw that it came at little bits of cost to growth or usage, they chose not to launch those experiments. That's things like not sending notifications during the school day or not sending them late at night.
Meta, the company you used to work for, the one that you blew the whistle on, it did respond to these lawsuits here in Canada and said that the company has parents' interest at heart and said that it's introduced 30 tools to try and give parents control over their platform. Tell me what you say about the impact those tools are having and whether they go anywhere near far enough.
What's fascinating is usually the way they frame that sentence is they say that, we've launched over 30 tools for improving children's well-being. If you look at when most of those tools came out, they were launched on a single day in 2021 when the United Kingdom launched something called the Age Appropriate Design Code. They said, you need to make sure that your products are at least minimally protecting kids. That's things like don't let strangers contact them, things that we would all kind of consider, obvious interventions. Yeah. So when we look at what's available, we need to remember these companies ship more safety features when they're under pressure, when people are paying attention. And so the lawsuits are doing their job if it makes Meta focus more on safety.
So there's lawsuits and there's also government regulation, which I think you also think needs to happen. This government is putting in place a harms reduction piece of legislation federally, provincially in Quebec. That the premier has expressed some notion that perhaps limiting social media use to those over 16 would be a good government intervention. How big a role should government be playing in terms of limiting social media use to children?
In general, social media stands out amongst most consumer products in that we don't actually get to participate as consumers in the same way that we usually do. For most products we consume, say a car, say even our clothes, we get to see labels on those things that tell us what's in this piece of this consumer product we're buying. We get to compare them. We can have independent scientists go and test them. We don't have to trust the companies. For each of us, social media is its own different special thing. We all see something different. And so at a minimum, we need laws like the Online Harms Act or Online Harms Bill that Canada is proposing, because it requires the companies to disclose the risks they know about, come up with plans to reduce those risks, and give us the right that when we ask questions, we actually get answers. So, just to balance that kind of ability for us to be consumers, we need to have the government act.
Just give us a sense of how damaging you think these social media apps are for kids whose brains are still developing.
So I've started to meet more and more often with middle school children, right? I don't have personally a child who's in the middle school years, high school years. I think it's really easy for adults to look at social media and see it as kind of a frivolous, kind of small add-on in your life. When you go and talk to 13 and 14-year-olds in Canada, they say things like, I've been on social media since I was 6 years old. I've been on since I was 7 years old. At least a third of the kids I've talked to have been on since, the 6, 7, 8 year range. It's kind of amazing. Yeah. When you ask children to construct personal brands for themselves, and these kids are really hyper aware of like how popular is the content they're constructing. You put kids in a position that they don't deserve to be in, right? If we looked back in time 30 years ago and asked, which children in the world cared about their personal brand, or were like actively in a large scale trying to concoct a personal brand, or it was child stars. In general, some child stars end up okay, but that's kind of the exception to the rule. And so I think it's one of these questions of, do children have a right to a digital free childhood? Do they have the right to spend time in person with other kids? Because when you poll kids, they say they're lonely. They want to spend more time in person with their friends, but they think their friends don't want to do that. And so the kids end up locked in these systems where, they know they're unhappy, but they feel like they can't leave. And that's not fair.
A few days ago, you were virtually, anyway, at Meta's annual shareholder meeting where you asked the board for an annual child safety report to assess how they are reducing harm to kids, or if they are. What was your message to the board there, and what was their response to your request?
I was trying to amplify a message from the other major Meta whistleblower who came forward almost a year ago, Arturo Bejar, who was the first engineering manager on trust and safety at Meta. And he came forward and said, unless we ask for metrics that are about the experiences that children describe themselves, these platforms aren't going to get better. And the metrics that he called out were things like when they actually asked children, have you been sexually harassed? Do you experience unwanted sexual advances? 1 in 8 girls between the ages of 13 and 16 said that happened to them in the last week. We were asking and saying, you can't just give us these summary statistics of like, this is the number of under 13-year-old accounts that you took down. You need to actually ask kids about their experiences, because their experiences matter. And the response was, unsurprisingly, because Mark Zuckerberg controls 61% of the voting shares for Meta, the resolution lost. But the exciting thing is it tied for second place. It got the best number of votes that it's ever gotten to date. So it got close to 50% of the remaining votes after Mark's. And so I think there's a hunger and a recognition amongst investors that operating in the dark is itself a financial risk. Meta has repeatedly set the record for the largest single day drawdown of a stock in history. Like, you shouldn't get that record more than once.
Frances Hougen, thank you so much for speaking with us. I hope you'll come back again. Thank you.
My pleasure.